Well, good evening and welcome to the Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council series, Deliberate Dialogues, the intersection of the criminal justice system and domestic violence. Tonight, we will be having the Office of Justice and Safety, having a conversation. And so thank you all for being here and for those who will watch the recording. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Barbie Brashear, our Executive Director.
Thank you, Thisha. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us here on a Thursday evening. Hopefully you've had the opportunity to step outside and get a breath of non-humidity air. We got to take advantage of every one of those kinds of days we get. So welcome fall. We'll see how much of it we actually get. Tonight is kind of the culmination of a series of presentations. We have started our journey several months ago with a representative from bail and bond to talk to us and give us education and information about what it means to have a bail or a bond assigned to a criminal case, what that looks like, how it is a protective factor or could not be a protective factor for victims of domestic violence. We also had the opportunity to have presentations from folks from the criminal and civil courts to give us information just about how those court systems operate, how they function. We had representatives from the probation and parole offices talking with us about what it means for offender accountability on those kinds of restrictions for folks that have been found guilty or are in the process of a trial related to a domestic violence offense. We had representatives from the district attorney's office and from the public defender's office giving us wonderful information about how both of those offices approach these cases, working with cases where there is intimate partner violence, domestic violence. And then tonight is kind of the culmination, and we're so honored to have Veronica James and Lindsay Linder here to talk with us about how Harris County Commissioner's Court, and most specifically the Office of Justice and Safety, function as a part of a criminal justice system response in cases of domestic violence. And actually what they'll be doing is kind of giving us an overview of those two systems, two things. That one's a system, the Commissioner's Court system, and then what specifically the Office of Justice and Safety is doing per direction of our commissioners. But all of this to say that what we've been hoping to do with this series is provide a community orientation, awareness raising, education opportunity so folks know what it means when there's the intersection of a domestic violence case in the criminal justice system. You know, many times we make assumptions that people that are accessing those systems know how to do that and what that means and looks like. And we make assumptions that people that are working with those that are accessing or part of those systems know what those systems look like and how they function. And in a county as large as Harris County, it's impossible for everybody to know everything all the time. So that is our duty. One of the duties of the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council is to try to provide awareness and education to the community. And it became very apparent when COVID made her presence known that it was affecting and impacting our systems and causing strain on systems that were already strained. And we didn't have the education about the systems in the first place. So hence, that is what Deliberate Dialogues has been all about. At the end of this presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about our October gathering and give you some anticipatory guidance of what to expect in that realm. I'm going to turn it over to, I think, Lindsay, you're up first. Is that correct? Nope. Is it Veronica? I'll turn it over to the two of you. I hope that along the way, we're going to ask folks to drop questions in the chat. And I might have a few questions that arise as you talk. So hopefully you'll be okay with us kind of, you know, instead of waiting to the end for questions, having questions along the way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, sounds good. Take it away, Veronica.
Okay. So Welcome. Good evening. Hope nobody else got stuck in elevators. We heard some stories, but I'm Dr. Veronica James. I'm the survivor crime researcher at the Office of Justice and Safety. I'm joined with my colleague, Lindsay Linder, who's the interim policy director, also with the Harris County Office of Justice and Safety. And tonight we're going to discuss a little bit about who we are, what we do, what are some things we've done specifically for survivors of crime, and all that fun stuff. And I'll gladly answer any questions either as they come up or at the end. Just to give you some background, I got my PhD in criminology, criminal justice in 2010, and I focused mostly on victimization issues, particularly reporting of sexual assault. So I did my dissertation on that, published in that realm as well, and did a lot of research on that. I was in academia for about 7 years before I decided to make the transition outside of academia and decided to come here to beautiful, wonderful, humid and hot Texas. But I've been loving the last few days of weather and try to actually use some of my research and some of my experience with victimization and victimization issues to actually make change within the system and better help survivors of crime than rather just talking about it or publishing in the academia where a lot of it just is read by other academics and no real change happens. So I will open it up to Lindsay for her introduction.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for having us. We're so excited to be here. Just wanted to introduce myself. I've been with the Office of Justice and Safety for 2 years next week. Before that, I worked as senior policy attorney for the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition, working on state level policy, mostly at the legislature, all related to criminal justice issues. I'm a lawyer by training, but I've been in criminal justice policy my whole career. And I am really passionate about survivor issues. My sister was shot and killed by her husband in 2006. So domestic violence is something that I, care a lot to work towards prevention and interventions and support for survivors. So this is just something I'm so excited to have, this conversation with you guys. I wanted to share that we're basically just so excited to talk with you guys. We'll definitely open it up for questions. We put together a presentation, but this is just sort of a guide for our conversation. We want to just sort of be available resources to you, not just in this conversation, but in general. And I just want to lastly say thank you so much for coordinating this series of conversations, because the criminal justice system is incredibly complex and it is so hard to understand all the different players and everything that's happening. And there are so few resources available that just provide education and easily digestible information about how the system works. So this is such a resource, and I plan for our policy team to review all of your videos from your series as part of our professional development, because I think there's so much that even we can learn about how the system operates. Because like you said, Barbie, you can never know everything, and there's always more room to learn and to grow. So thank you so much for having us and for having these conversations.
There we go. All right. So as a little background, we all know that Harris County is huge. It is the largest county in Texas with over 4 million residents. We're the third most populous county in the United States and have more population than 26 states. So we're super big. We also have a lot of people housed in our jail currently. There's over 10,000 housed in our jail, which is the largest in Texas and the third largest in the United States. There are over 60 law enforcement agencies operating in Harris County, which include the Harris County Sheriff's Office, 8 constables, the Houston Police Department, 29 smaller city police agencies like Bel Air Police Department or Pasadena Police Department, and more than 20 other agencies, for example, the school district police. Other county departments, in addition to our own, include the district attorney's office, public defender's office, pretrial services, community supervision, and the criminal courts. So we're super large with a lot of players, and a lot of players in our criminal justice system due to our size. So Commissioner's Court, what is it? It is basically the governing body of the county. Our Texas Constitution specifies that this consists of a county judge and 4 county commissioners elected by the voters of their commissioners' precincts. The county judge is the presiding officer of the court, And in our state, there are 254 counties. Once elected, the judge and the commissioners serve terms of 4 years, but these are staggered. So they don't all come up for election at the same time. What do? They adopt budget and tax rate. They approve all budgets. And if you've been watching the Commissioners Court, they've been doing a lot with the budget safety. They play a significant role in our public safety and efforts on the criminal justice system. And they have the authority to divide the county into individual precincts. So recently they did redistricting of it and reconfigured the precincts. So some may have been in precinct 4, now are precinct 3, or precinct 3 and now in precinct 2, because they do change those after, I think it's after every census, they change that.
Hey, can we stay there for just 1 second?
Yes.
Because I think what you just described is so important for anyone who's living in Harris County, whether they're, accessing our criminal justice system or any of the other systems, but just as a citizen, like that, what you've just described, their role, but adopting budget and tax rate, right? So if you're living in Harris County and you're a Harris County taxpayer, this is the decision-making body for where our taxes go, right? And then they approve those budgets and develop those budgets based on input, theoretically, based on input from the county's citizens. So correct me if I'm wrong, Veronica and Lindsay, judges over these 4 precincts that you've described get input from their constituents related to issues that they have concerns about, right? Which include budget and purchasing and where those funds are going, correct? And then that third bullet point that I think is so critically important is how they play a significant role in public safety and criminal justice, right? Like that, and to me, that's basically in a nutshell why you guys are here tonight, to really help us and have that understanding, because of what our mission and our goal is to increase access to services and safety for survivors, to find ways to improve offender accountability, and included with that is rehabilitation, right? And interventions for those that are using violence, and then ultimately working to prevent domestic violence deaths. So I can't underscore how important it is that we all have that understanding. I'm so glad that you are giving us that information.
Yeah, Barbie, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think to the extent that you should know who your senator is, you should know who your state senator is, you should know who your state representative is, you should also know who your precinct commissioner is, because that is a great advocate for you in whatever is going on in your community. You reach out to their office and they really take their lead from their constituents. And so if you have issues in your local park or your local school, or you're, struggling with maybe crime in your neighborhood or whatever, issues you might be facing, you can reach out to your commissioner precinct office and they will do what they can to connect you to services, to assist you. If you have an issue that they can help solve, they are going to be really, interested in learning more about that and seeing how they might be able to help. And they can be great connectors. And also, like, even if it's not a problem they can solve, they might know who can solve it. Or, they might use it to sort of develop the county legislative agenda. Like there's certain things that are controlled at the state level that we don't have any control over. For example, something that off just the top of my head, 17-year-olds are adults in Texas for criminal justice purposes under all circumstances. If you were arrested at 17, you were treated as an adult, full scope, no matter what. So if you realize that you have a 17-year-old, they get arrested, you don't get to be involved in the process, they're treated like adults and you don't like that, you call your precinct chair and they might be inclined to sort of advocate for their jurisdiction at the legislature for that to be changed, because that is a state level law. So the county does have a legislative agenda, which is something I don't think that most people realize. Every legislative session, the county puts out a legislative agenda. So it's not even limited to stuff that they can control. It can also be stuff that's, over their heads, but they can be an advocate for you in those rooms and in those spaces.
And Lindsay, so if somebody has a legislative agenda item that they want to propose or think about or talk with their commissioner about, how do they go about doing that? What steps would they take?
You could do a few different things. You know, selfishly being a criminal justice policy nerd and being accessible to you guys, I say give me and Veronica a call if it's related to anything criminal justice related. We probably have somebody on our staff who's probably working on that issue who would love to have a conversation with you about, you know, maybe we could help answer questions or provide, you know, context or whatever. So feel free to reach out to us, but additionally, or instead of, you could also reach out to your commissioner precinct. So you can go online, put in your address and find out who represents you in terms of your precinct. I think it's like represent us something. We can put it, well, I'll find it and put it in the chat, but there's like a very basic form where you can put in and it'll tell you the full scope of who represents you from the US Senate all the way down to your local representatives. And so that should tell you who your commissioner precinct is, and they'll have a number there for constituents where you can just reach out and just say, hey, I'd like to talk to, I would say, if it was me calling, I would say, I'd like to talk to whoever is working on, if it's, I would go by the subject matter of what you're advocating for. So if it's environmental issue or a survivor issue of, you know, a criminal justice issue or a park issue or transportation or whatever it is, I would just say, this is the subject matter. I have, you know, a problem I'm looking to solve. I'd love to talk with somebody on your staff who's working on this issue. And that's a good place to start. And they'll, you know, kind of, that's like the entryway into the office. And eventually you can say, hey, I'd love to talk to the commissioner about this. You know, you can sort of work your way up within the office. And that's a great option to do that. I also would encourage you to utilize your representatives as well. You have a representative that goes to Austin on your behalf, and they absolutely love to hear from their constituents. In my experience working at the legislature, they really, really do want to be public servants to their constituents. They want to hear from you. They want to advocate for you. They're looking for issues, you know, to work on in Austin. They want to know what you want to see from them. So I would just encourage you to both reach out to your county folks, but also to your representative who's representing you in Austin. And if you have any trouble navigating that, I mean, I'm super happy to help. If you say like, hey, here's who, you know, who I want to talk to, or here's what I want to happen. Who do I need to talk to? You know, if I can help you, I absolutely will.
Thank you so much for that, Lindsay.
Any other questions about what Commissioners Court, what they do and stuff? No.
One more thing. I don't know if you're going to talk about this, but there are monthly meetings that are open to the public for viewing, as well as commenting. So you can certainly use your voice in that way as well.
Yeah. They generally meet every 2 weeks. About it. It does vary based on like holiday schedules and stuff like that, but it generally does occur every 2 weeks, and you can go now in person to watch them at the County Administration Building on Preston Street, or you can watch online. They are televised. They are live streamed online, so you can watch court there as well, and they are also on their website, so you can actually go back and watch like Tuesday's court now, or you can watch 2 weeks ago on the 13th that court. So if you want to watch back courts, you can also do that because they are on there as well. And I believe they release the agenda for the upcoming court the week before, so you can go to the website and check for the agenda and see what's on the agenda, so you can decide to sign up or go to court and sign up there to be a speaker as well. So
Thank
what's the Office of Justice and Safety? Well, on March 12th, 2019, Commissioners Court approved the creation of the Justice Administration Department. It was initially set up as a resource for all the Harris County criminal and juvenile justice agencies and the staff the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. It was also in charge of tracking the implementation of the O'Donnell Consent Decree, which we will discuss a little bit later. But initially we were set up for these. Our aim is also to advance the Harris County Justice and Safety goal, which is to promote safe, healthy, thriving communities. Technical difficulties. Thriving communities through restorative and evidence-based strategies that foster public trust, prevent violence and trauma, reduce racial and economic disparities, and minimize criminal justice system exposure where at all possible. This year in 2022, if I can speak, our name was changed from JAD to the Office of Justice and Safety to better reflect our aims, values, and goals. We're comprised of 4 divisions: administration and special projects, for example, those tracking the implementation of O'Donnell, communications and outreach, those who do our press releases and our newsletters, data management and analytics. They help with our dashboards, and policy and research, who does policy research, reports, and publications. So those are our 4 divisions in the Office of Justice and Safety. Any questions for that?
Veronica, so you mentioned that part of the reason for setting up JAD was to staff the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council.
Yes.
I think there are many people who have never heard of that, who don't know what that is. Can you talk about that briefly?
So correct me if I'm wrong, Lindsay, I know just went through a lot of restructuring of who was on the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council and their actual directives and what they're going to exactly be doing. But the thing is also to help the effectiveness and efficiency of our criminal justice system, look at best practices for Harris County, and have the stakeholders of certain parts of our criminal justice system really at the table and really talking about these things, and really, like it says, coordinating to make our Harris County criminal justice system more effective and efficient, and also reduce those the inequities that have been present in the past in our criminal justice system.
That's right. And I would just say this is the one place where all of the electeds and the, heads of the different justice departments are actually getting together at the same table and having conversations about sort of overarching criminal justice response strategy, right? Because everybody's sort of in their silo oftentimes. Like the, public defender's office is hyper-focused on what the public defender's office is responsible for. They are working on their initiatives and their performance indicators and everything. They're not thinking about some overarching strategy for the county, right? Like everybody's in their own little circles. And so you need consensus in order to have broad reforms that impact various departments. So that's what the coordinating council is for. It's going to get the district attorney and the public defender's office and the, commissioners and the, Office of Justice and Safety, and everybody in the same room to say, what are our overarching criminal justice goals for our county, and how do we all play a part in making that happen, within our different places, and getting, consensus. Because if one department wants to do something, but other departments don't, we're not going to make a whole lot of progress. So it's really to coordinate larger, policy goals and larger sort of improvements to our justice system amongst all the stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. And Lindsay, is that a meeting, or is that a place where people can be a part of meetings or have input to agenda items? Is that something that's has a public face?
I believe that those are closed meetings.
Okay.
That's pretty much the only meeting I can think of that we sort of facilitate or that we're involved in that isn't open to the public. Commissioners Court meetings are fully open to the public. The O'Donnell consent decree meetings are open to the public, but the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council meetings are not open to the public. And I think that's because they want to foster an environment of collaboration and, for people to be really candid and sort of have their guards down and be honest about, what challenges they're facing and stuff like that. So those are not open, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. Veronica, do you feel like that's also the case?
Yeah.
Pretty sure that's the case. I don't think they're open to it.
Yeah, they're not open, because I know even I asked to attend one of the last ones, and since there were still COVID restrictions, they were actually limiting even the stakeholders that could be present at that point in time. And I think now, even though the restrictions are a little bit eased, they're still not, as far as I know, open to the public. They were when they were being live streamed or Zoom or WebEx. I think they were using WebEx. They were at that time, but I think right now they're still closed to the public.
I think the best sort of opportunity you have to sort of influence what's happening in those meetings is to just talk with your precincts, because they're all involved, and you can say, hey, I'd really like this to be a priority for the county and thereby the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. And are they working on this? And they can give you information about, this is a priority. And I can tell you right now, sort of the main priorities for our county and the main priorities for the coordinating criminal justice coordinating council are reducing our jail population, which is at capacity, which is not ever a good, that's not good for public safety, you know, and reducing our criminal case backlog, which is also just not good for like proper functioning of the court system. So those are two issues that our county is sort of uniquely facing in the wake of COVID and before that Hurricane Harvey. So those are like, they really are working on sort of big picture issues like that. It does, there's not a whole lot of opportunity to get super in the weeds on different issues, if that makes sense.
If that does, that's super helpful. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Veronica.
Any other questions? So our previous stuff was under the name JAD, Justice Administration. We're now the Office of Justice and Safety. So you might see some changes as we're changing our name over to our new name of Office of Justice and Safety, but that's what we are going by now, and that's our name going forward. So in case you get confused and see JAD, or we might accidentally refer to ourselves as JAD because we were used to that, but we're Office of Justice and Safety.
And for the most part, that's all that changed was the name. We didn't have any big changes in scope or staffing or anything like that. We just had a renaming. They changed their mind about what they wanted us to be called.
Yeah, they just changed how we're referred, but everything else, like, so our aim is the same. Advancing Harris County Justice Safety goal, like what we're doing is the same. All our work is the same. It's just our name that changed. So, Lindsay, you're up.
Awesome. So it's great to hear that you guys heard from folks who were, familiar with issues of bail. So this is probably some recap for you guys, but I'll share it just in case. I don't want to make any assumptions about what you might know about it. But bail is always at the top of the conversation when you talk about criminal justice in the media. It's a big issue for our county for various reasons that I'll sort of touch on. So I just wanted to make sure we had some education in here around what bail is and how it operates. So as I think everybody, if you were in the bail conversation before, you know that bail is essentially a security or an assurance that's given by a defendant in the criminal justice system, hopefully assuring that they are going to appear in court to address their charges while they are released pre-trial. So types of bail, generally when we refer to bail, there are three divisions. So you have cash, or otherwise known as surety bonds, which are what you traditionally think of as bail bonds, where you would actually put up a money amount or a security for release. And that's the type of bond in which many people rely on a bondsman who would put in theory, a large percentage of the total bond amount, and the person utilizing the bondsman would pay, say, 10% of the full bond charge in order to be released. That is often the case when somebody has a cash or surety bond, is that they utilize a bondsman as their surety for to be able to afford release, basically. Other types of bond include a personal bond, which doesn't require any money or relying on a bondsman or any sort of surety, but rather a person makes like a personal obligation, a personal promise that they're going to appear in court. And you have to be eligible for personal bond. And we saw recently with legislation, SB 6, this in the past, one of the special sessions that changed who is eligible for a personal bond. So there are limited circumstances in which somebody can get a personal bond. And the third type that we use in Harris County is a general order bond, or as you'll often hear referred to as a GOB. And that is very similar to a personal bond, although there is some amount of money. Often, I think it's $100 is the maximum amount for a general order bond, but it is used in cases where folks are eligible for it. It's most often really like sort of low-level offenses, misdemeanor offenses specifically, and they generally have restrictions even then on like prior criminal history and things like that. Defendants who are arrested and charged with a crime in Texas, is really important to understand. There is a legal presumption of release. There is a legal presumption that a person has the right to bail and the right to be released pending trial. This is because under the US Constitution and the Texas Constitution, our government believes that somebody has the right to a presumption of innocence rather than sort of a default, you're guilty until your trial. We're going to hold you until your trial, until you essentially prove your innocence. It's the other way. We're going to assume that you are innocent until via trial you are proved to be guilty. So the system is really built around this presumption of innocence and this right to bail and right to release pre-trial. It's very limited in Texas and in many states, very limited circumstances where in which a person can be detained prior to trial, what we call preventive detention. So preventatively detained while waiting for their trial. Those circumstances are really, really narrow and really specific. And even in the cases that apply, there are timelines, 90-day constitutional timeline and a 60-day statutory timeline that even further restrict how long we are able to detain somebody preventatively before trial without giving them access to a bond. What the courts, so oftentimes you might see in the media, like somebody who was on a release bond of some kind, and they committed maybe a high level offense while on bond. And your instinct is to say, your instinct might be to say, why were they released, right? Why were they eligible for release? Why were they in the community and able to commit this offense while on bond? And in many circumstances, it is simply because they were not eligible to be preventatively detained. They did not meet these very limited circumstances where in which a court can say, we're not going to give you access to a bond of any kind. We are going to preventatively detain you. Oftentimes that's just not an option in our system under the laws that we have in our state. So what courts can do when they can't preventatively detain someone, they have to give them access to a bond of some kind. What they can do is they can put pretrial restrictions on that person. So pretrial restrictions can include GPS monitoring, a house arrest, no contact orders, different, drug testing requirements, different probation classes, counseling classes, things like that, interlock device, if it's some sort of driving under the influence offense. There's a whole list of conditions that can be put on people pre-trial. And oftentimes that is what the court uses to try and sort of ensure public safety while somebody is released in lieu of preventive detention. Any questions about that? Okay, great. We'll go to the next one. So I just wanted to share a little bit about recent changes to misdemeanor bail practices in Harris County. You might have heard about these in the news, or, if you're engaged in criminal justice issues, this has been a big deal for our county over the past couple of years. So in 2016, there was a lawsuit saying that Harris County's misdemeanor bail practices were unconstitutional. Essentially, the suit alleged that folks were being detained simply because they were poor and without them being a threat to public safety. And so we don't want debtors' prisons. We don't want folks to be detained simply because they're poor. We want, that's not constitutional. So there was a lawsuit, and in 2019, the parties to the lawsuit, which included Harris County, they agreed to a consent decree, which was referred to as the O'Donnell consent decree. You'll hear that throughout the Harris County criminal justice system. And that O'Donnell consent decree, essentially it's a settlement agreement that the parties are bound to, and saying like, this is what we're going to do to settle this. So we don't have to, it's a type of remedy, right? In the suit, they came to an agreement. This consent decree was the resolution. So under the O'Donnell consent decree, most misdemeanor defendants are released, in the words of the consent decree, as soon as practicable after arrest, with an unsecured bail that has to be set below $100. Any misdemeanor defendants who are not released, who are in sort of the carve-out categories, as we call them, are entitled to a bail hearing within 48 hours of their arrest. And cash bail then in those circumstances can only be required after the judicial officer finds, by clear and convincing evidence, which is the highest standard that we have in terms of evidence, that either the defendant has the ability to pay a required amount of a cash bond, or after consideration, no combination of less restrictive conditions could reasonably be assured to protect the community. So it's important to note, a lot of people overlook this, the O'Donnell consent decree only applies to misdemeanors. It does not apply to felonies at all. And I just wanted to share that the next O'Donnell meeting, which is public, open to the public, it is scheduled for Friday, a week from tomorrow, at the Harris County Administration Building. Veronica and I will be there along with many other justice partners. So if you are really interested in this stuff, you're welcome to attend the public meeting next Friday.
Hey, Lindsay, can you talk a little bit about when you talked about carve outs, and one of the carve outs is for domestic violence? And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what exactly that is, what that means.
Sure. So basically the consent decree, while it only applies to misdemeanors, it doesn't apply to all misdemeanors. And so those misdemeanor offenses that do not receive sort of, I guess, the benefit of the O'Donnell consent decree fall into what's called like a carve out category. And it's basically just saying like, we are only dealing with misdemeanors, but not all misdemeanors. And here are the misdemeanors we think need a series of special steps, right, to make sure that there is no threat to the public. We're not just going to say, if you have a misdemeanor offense across the board, you are going to get a general order bond and you're going to be, released on a general order bond. They have some extra protections for certain types of misdemeanor offenses that sort of raise a red flag, right, where there are extra protections to say, even though this is a misdemeanor, which is a lower level of offense in our system, right, supposedly less serious offense, even some misdemeanors might warrant a second look, basically. So there's a list of the carve out offenses, and I can pull them up really quickly and just tell you what they are.
Well, I think it's domestic violence and it's DWI with accident, and I think there might be one more.
I think there's 6 of them in total. And yeah, it's just special circumstances where in which the folks who signed the consent decree agreed that there should be a little bit of extra protection before just assuming that the person is not a threat to public safety and should get a general order bond.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I was also going to add, if you can't make the public meeting or are busy, but still are interested in it, there's going to be a virtual meeting on the 13th at 6 p.m. That's also the public meeting. They're kind of breaking it this time. They did have it virtual for a long time, like everything. And now they're having the public meeting on Friday the 7th, but also a virtual meeting if you'd rather attend virtually. Any other questions? Okay, so what have we done? The Office of Justice and Safety does a variety of different policy areas or projects. We engage in a wide range of research, analytics, and policy efforts, assessing and strengthening safety practices, policies, programs, and initiatives in Harris County. So some of the examples of our policy areas are violence prevention and alternatives to incarceration, criminal case processing and reduction of the case backlog, indigent defense, gender responsive corrections, law enforcement best practices, and youth justice. We also have a variety of public-facing data dashboards, index crimes, bail, jail population, traffic stop demographics, O'Donnell, and indigent defense. And those are all on our website, that anybody can go on our website and look at all these different dashboards. And all our reports are also on our website. So if you want to read any of the reports we published, they're up there as well. Anything you want to add, Lindsay? Any questions?
Well, I'm just wondering if you can offer a bit more information about what does it mean to be a policy area, and how does that come into practice?
Do you want to handle that, Lindsay?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So that's a great question, because, when I was in law school, I had no idea I'd end up being a policy attorney. I didn't even know that was a thing or what that meant. And yeah, it's not something that's really common knowledge, right? So to say that we are a policy team, we work on policy issues, what that really means is that we work on systemic problems and trying to identify systemic problems and solve them in a systemic way. So as opposed to a direct service organization, right, where in which you are solving individual problems, right? People are coming to you and you are providing direct services to individuals. We don't provide any direct services, broadly speaking at OJS. Instead, we work on systemic problems. So for example, say the problem is survivors not having access to information about resources in the county, right? So what Veronica's going to do is she's going to say, that's a systemic problem that's happening across the board. I'm going to identify a systemic solution. I'm going to create a survivors of crime resource guide that lists in a way that makes sense, right? Access to, all of the services that survivors have access to in the county. We're going to put the numbers, we're going to put the website links, we're going to talk with all of those different providers and find out who they serve and share that information easily for folks, right? And then we're going to release that so that there's a systemic solution to this systemic problem. And that's a really, really specific example, but a lot of what we're really working towards oftentimes are, system improvements within the county to remove obstacles to different, justice issues. So right now, one of our big policy issues is we have a jail that's at capacity. How do we safely reduce our jail population? How do we minimize the system impact, minimize people's exposure to our criminal justice system in a way that still protects public safety, that still supports survivors, but that is going to ensure that when we have folks who we feel like are a threat to public safety, we have space to put them, we have somewhere to put them, right? And so we are working on a bunch of systemic solutions that would change the way the criminal justice system is operating on a systemic level, so that it would hopefully help benefit the entire county, because we're sort of making a change in process. When I say systemic change, I usually mean like some sort of process or procedure that is perpetrating some sort of harm or some sort of causing some sort of problem. It's all very like ethereal. And it's kind of hard. It sounds very like in the clouds a little bit, but it's really simple. It's like, is there an issue that's affecting, a large group of people? And can we make a change in, specifically for us, in county policy or procedure amongst some of our county departments that's going to solve that problem systemically, so that nobody is struggling with that moving forward, that we're just solving that problem in our system. It can also mean, policy also can refer more broadly to like legislative reform. But again, it's like your legislators have identified every bill that's filed is seeking to solve some kind of problem, right? It's whether or not we agree with our legislators about what the problem that they are trying to solve, if that is in fact a problem, there's some purported issue that the proposed legislation is seeking to solve on a systemic level. So to solve in policy or in practice or in process at some level. Does that make sense? Or should I totally try again?
No, it makes sense. And I have a couple of follow-up questions. And these are basically for raising awareness and information about this. So as the Office of Justice and Safety has identified these policy areas, right? Can you talk about how and where you look within the Harris County community to get information to support that these are the policy areas? And the follow-up to that would be to where do you guys look to help inform remedies that are being offered to strategically address those systems challenges?
Those are great questions, and the answer to them is not the same. So those are two separate questions. So I'm glad you phrased it like that. So the first part is, how do we develop our policy areas of focus? How do we decide what we're focusing on? And the answer to that is the vast majority of our work is reactive to directives directly from Commissioner's Court. So Commissioner's Court created us, and they tell us what they want us to work on. They ask us very specifically through motions in Commissioner's Court to study a specific issue, to produce a specific data dashboard, to coordinate a specific stakeholder group, right? Like they're very specific in what they want us to be working on. So most of our reports and big projects have a motion from court that very specifically dictates the work that we are going to be working on. We would love long-term to be able to do more proactive work, but with the staffing that we have and the amount of directives that we have gotten from Commissioner's Court since we were established in 2019, we have never gotten to a place where we've had a lot of capacity to do proactive work. We have, in rare circumstances, identified a policy problem through outside of Commissioner's Court, like, actually, I think the survivor resource guide was the impetus from that was a conversation that Veronica and a few of us on the staff had with the crime survivor, who explained that they were really having trouble accessing, like understanding what resources were available and finding information about them, and suggested that we create something that could sort of make that easier, right? So under some circumstances, we have gotten the projects from other areas outside of Commissioner's Court, but I would say 90+% come directives directly from Commissioner's Court. And our policy areas are just buckets that those projects fall under. And it's, you know, and I think that the commissioners decide what that work is based on what they feel like matters to their constituents. So that's a way that you guys can sort of dictate what we work on, is to talk with your commissioners about what's important to you in the realm of criminal justice. And they're going to pass that on to us. They're going to ask us to look into those issues, develop data dashboards related to those issues, produce studies related to those issues, like that. It will trickle down to us, basically. And then the second part of your question being, once we have a directive, once we have a project that we're working on, right, how do we collect information around that, and who do we talk to, right, to decide how to go about conducting that study or creating that stakeholder group or whatever. And I think the answer to that for us in practice is we want to talk to everybody, and we try to talk to everybody. We try to talk to the widest range of stakeholders that could possibly have relevant information for us. We, you know, specific to crime survivor issues, Veronica is constantly reaching out to the, you know, the full spectrum of survivor providers and stakeholders within the system. So the victim services within the district attorney's office, folks who are, you know, in public health working on violence prevention, or, you know, anybody that we think could have relevant information. We are really, really open collaborators, and we are constantly looking for, you know, to collect more information and to hear from as much of the community and from as many different stakeholders as we possibly can. I think we all believe that the more information, the better. We really, really want to talk to everybody. And I think generally we are able to do that. I think generally people are really open to talking with us, sharing their perspectives, sharing information with us. And that is, you know, the more we're able to do that, the better information that we have access to, the better our recommendations can be, the higher quality our, you know, information can be for court. So yeah, it's, you know, we really are just, we want to talk to literally anyone who's interested to talk to us on any of these issues. And we try really hard to not miss anybody who's sort of available to us, but we can never know everybody that exists, which is why we're always just so eager to have conversations like this, to get our name out there so folks know that we exist, so that, you know, we can have sort of opportunities to connect. If there are issues that Veronica is going to share in a little bit more detail down this presentation about the specific areas that we work on. If something in here piques your interest, you're like, hey, that's an issue I have relevant experience about, or I'm interested in, please feel free always to contact us and to ask, you know, what are you working on in this policy bucket, or, you know, asking if are you guys ever involved in this, or do you know this group? Are you talking to them? Like, we don't know who we don't know. And so we're just super open to that. I don't think that anybody has ever suggested that we talk to someone or reached out to talk to us that we have not pursued that conversation, had those conversations. So
I think that's great. And I thank you for sharing that. I think the challenge that we all have, and I'm going to speak from the domestic violence lens specifically, is we know we have access to information from folks that are accessing services. So folks that are going to a domestic violence organization for help are able to offer feedback, or the agencies that are working with them are able to offer observations and expertise around the folks that are coming forward to be served, right? Mm-hmm. And the same is true for law enforcement or from the criminal justice system. What we don't have, and what's really missing for all of us collectively, is the people that are never making it to be served. Right. And that's from the domestic violence lens. Unfortunately, that's the vast majority of folks. And we've really learned that through Death Review Team. National research supports that as well. The number of folks that have unfortunately suffered a homicide because of domestic violence have not had a touch from an intervention. They might have had a criminal justice response, or they might have had a law enforcement response, but there's very little, intervention response from a formal domestic violence program or counseling service or program like that. So I just really value your response, Lindsay, and we don't know what we don't know. And what we don't know is how to get to those folks to get that to solicit that feedback and information. And by having forums like this and hearing you all speak, and hopefully, this ripples out and people tell others, we can start to garner and, bring that voice to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think violence survivors is like one category that is especially, like you said, especially difficult to make sure that we're touching everyone, that we're identifying everyone, that everybody has the opportunity to connect. And I think that's like, some of our work has really been centered around trying to increase visibility of like all survivors, because also the criminal justice system isn't a catch-all for survivors, right? And
Exactly.
so I think things like trauma recovery centers and different things like that are hopefully avenues to help elevate the voices of even more survivors and make sure that we're filling up the gaps and not letting people fall through the cracks as much as we possibly can.
Yeah.
And just really quickly, I have a question about your projects. And so you make recommendations to Commissioner's Court.
Correct.
Is there a way that we can support your recommendations so that Commissioner's Courts follow through on some of the recommendations? Because when you talk about, I think everybody in, the county right now is concerned about, the case backlog, especially when it comes to domestic violence folks. And then, law enforcement best practices and things like that, which we've been working on for several years now. But I'm just wondering, how do commissioners respond to your recommendations, and have any of the recommendations that y'all have made it past the recommendation stage, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Another excellent question. So the first part of your question in terms of like how to support our recommendations, isn't that a question that we love to hear? I think that the best thing to do is to let it be known to Veronica that you are available to sort of be in her virtual Rolodex, right, of folks to reach out to. As we have things that we are preparing to submit to court, Veronica will reach out to you. She will share that product with you, let you know what, here's what we're recommending. Here's when we're going to court. This is how it's going to go, and provide you with sort of opportunities to get involved. So if you'd like to speak during court, here's how you can do that. If speaking in court is really the main way to support our recommendations, because that's really where they're presented. And I have to say, luckily, historically, there's a lot of Commissioner's Court support for survivor issues. And a lot of times, and you asked if anything sort of makes it past that recommendation stage. Absolutely. One example that comes to the top of my head is Veronica worked really hard on a U visa model policy for our county to adopt a model U visa policy that ensures that immigrant survivors of crime are protected while they feel safe enough that they can report violence that occurs to them, violence that happens to them. So she worked really hard on that, and it was approved by court, and is working really hard on implementation and in trying to see it adopted by as many, law enforcement agencies as possible. And so, yeah, absolutely. The ideas for, we don't like to make recommendations for the ether, the ideas for the things that we're recommending to become reality. And on, when it comes to supporting survivors, I think that is a really, a real possibility. These are, the Commissioner's Court, in my opinion, really wants to support survivors. So I think we're in a good position on a lot of these. I think the challenge in this exact moment is that the county is in a little bit of a budget crisis because they're having trouble adopting a new tax rate. And it looks like we are going to have most departments starting out, potentially most departments starting out the new budget year sort of with less budget than they had in the year before, which is normally you hope to have more budget than you had the year before because of inflation. And so there's concerns about what we are and aren't going to be able to fund in the county over the next budget cycle. So it really comes down to resources. Oftentimes the philosophical support is there typically for recommendations. It's just a matter of like, do we actually have the funding to realize whatever the recommendation is? So I think because of that, we recognize that we try to make recommendations along the spectrum of what resource investments they would require. So we try to have, if we don't have any money, here's what we can do without any money, right? Here's what we can do to improve systems. And then also recommend, if we have money and when we have money, here's how we think we could invest that in a way that's going to give us the biggest return on investment for our dollars. So it's often a mixed bag in terms of what court is able to actually realize from our recommendations. But if you are interested at all in like being involved, or you just want Veronica to keep you apprised as to what's going to Commissioner's Court related to survivor issues, just make that known to her and she will make sure to communicate with you.
Yeah. And like Lindsay said, usually court is pretty responsive to the survivor items and very much want to support survivors. The issue does come down to funding a lot of the times, but they do frequently give us items that are survivor focused to work on, and also are very much on the side of supporting as much as possible what we do. And again, reiterating, we don't know what we don't know. Getting to those that are not seeking formal services has been kind of like my passion since like college. Hence why I looked at reporting and victimization reporting issues, because I really want to know about those individuals who have been hurt, who have been victimized, that are not seeking formal services, and what services they need. So learning from them would be the best. We're hoping, hopefully in the near future, to get off the ground the Survivor of Crime Committee for the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. And that's a big part of reaching out to individuals who maybe didn't seek formal services, but still want now their voice heard, to be part of that committee, so they can maybe change parts of the criminal justice system, to change the things for the reasons why they didn't seek services, for others to seek those formal services. So yes, if you know anybody, please send them my way. I would love to talk to them.
And we
find
would
out
love
as much as possible.
Yeah. And you guys mentioned, I know I shared, like, you can go to your commissioners with any public policy issues that you're facing in your jurisdiction, but if it's specifically a criminal justice issue or a survivor issue, feel free to reach out to Veronica and I and start there, because even though most of our directives come from Commissioner's Court, that doesn't mean that we can't help you get something to become a directive from Commissioner's Court for us, right? Like if you come to us with an issue and you say, hey, this isn't working for survivors, and here's, a potential solution, or if you don't even have to know solutions, you can just say, we have a problem and we can work to try and help, we can work with you to try and figure out what solutions could look like. And then we can go with you to your commissioner precinct, whoever represents you, and say, hey, we've been talking to OJS. We've identified, this problem. Here's what we think could be a solution. We want to talk to your staff about it. Like, we're happy to be sort of a bridge to those conversations if you're more comfortable to start the conversation with us rather than going directly to your commissioner office. Like, feel free to send us any concerns, suggestions, recommendations that you have. And as much, if you just want to send us an email and say, hey, I saw this as a problem, but like, that's all you want to be involved, no problem. Or if you want to get on a call with us and talk through proposed recommendations for, changing policy for the better, like, we're open to that too. So please just consider us to be friends and don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Yeah. And we'll have our contact information at the end. So, and if you have to jump off before we get there, reach out to, Barbie or Alicia or Amy. They have my contact information, and you're free to share that with individuals who might want to contact us for those reasons.
Thank you.
So I'm going to talk, because it's what I do, and more what this forum is for is our survivor focus projects. So I did go through some of our policy buckets and our dashboards, but we've done quite a few survivor focus projects. So one of the main ones was our victim services gap assessment. We were directed by Commissioner's Court when we were JAD, now JS, in September of 2019, to complete a victim services gap assessment to examine existing victim services within the county and identify any gaps to services. By identifying gaps, this would provide information and opportunities for innovation, trauma prevention, and restorative justice. So the idea was to look at the county, where are the gaps, and then how can we fill these gaps to better support survivors. The resulting report proposes strategies for eliminating gaps and enhancing collaboration among all stakeholders by considering best practices. Our department and an outside consultant interviewed 30 victim service agencies in Harris County between November 2020 and February 2021. Despite conducting over 35 hours of interviews with these service providers, there are still many agencies and crime types that remain to be explored and were not within the scope of this initial project. And hopefully in the future, we can maybe do another project, but again, it comes down to funding. So we'll see about in the future. But with this initial project, there were several challenges identified by service providers, which include but are not limited to increased demand for services based on COVID-19 and resultant lack of capacity, even though services were requested more. Many survivors did not feel safe trying to report. Many who were immigrants without legal documentation or those who had past negative experiences with system providers didn't feel comfortable reporting. Services targeted for underserved or marginalized communities were struggling for resources. Funds are stretched thin, and those who are starting up or in traditionally underserved neighborhoods tend to have the thinnest margins of their budget, so they were struggling for more resources. There's sometimes language access, so gaps with language access for survivors whose primary language is not English. Oftentimes they're not formal translators, and those translators who are there are often volunteers who are not trauma informed, and sometimes there are not even translators for certain languages, oftentimes things like ASL. Inconsistent policies across the county. Policies are inconsistently implemented. Lethality assessments and U visa certification policies are inconsistent or intermittently used across the county. And there are data challenges. Most data in the county is siloed. Systems don't talk to each other. And sometimes the way one agency collects data is not the same as the way another agency collects data. So it's hard to compare across systems. I'll stop first. Any questions about that?
Was one of the gaps that you identified was the fact that most of our law enforcement agencies have either do not have victim services or have understaffed victim services, and most of those victim services are services that they have are grant funded. They're not budgeted in their agencies, so they mostly are at the whims of a grant, and then when the grant runs out, they don't get picked up. And so none, like maybe out of the 8 constables, I think only about 4 have victim services units. 1 just got a grant again, and then the sheriff's office has 9, but 7 are grant funded, and then more than half of the DA's victim services staff are funded by grants. So I'm just wondering, was that taken into consideration? Was that like a recommendation that could be made to fund victim services and law enforcement that helps alleviate some of these issues?
Yeah, that was one of the gaps we noticed, is that a lot of the agencies, when they did have victim services, if not all, the majority of those were grant funded. And especially with COVID, although many counties and areas did get ARPA funding, before this, there was talk of VOCA funding being cut for many agencies. So there was a talk of like, what are we going to do? All our victim service providers, are grant funded, or 9 out of 10 of them are grant funded. We know we're going to get VOCA funding cut. We can't keep them on. So now our services are going to be cut because we don't have the personnel to do this. So that was one of the challenges and the gaps we identified. And one of the things we're like, they need more funding for this. Again, that comes down to budget issues and funding. Lindsay?
Yeah, I just wanted to add really quick that something I wanted to share that's not included in this slide because it was technically a youth justice initiative, but I think it would be of interest to this group. We recently established the first, a first of its kind youth justice community reinvestment fund. And basically what that is, it is a pot of money that was taken from the county budget, from your tax dollars, but that were historically allocated to other things within the justice system, and it was taken out of sort of the funding traditional services, and instead was put into a grant fund where a consultant was brought in to determine how to get that money into the hands of folks doing the groundwork, directly serving youth in a way that basically directly working on prevention of youth violence. So serving youth in a way that is going to set them up for success and prevent system involvement. So that's like a really cool, fun thing that we're getting to do to really support local providers. I think that that is such a cool model to maybe one day do something like that for survivor organizations, where you have a fund from the county that is reallocated to service providers that are doing the on the ground work to support survivors and need that sustainable access to funding. The Youth Justice Community Reinvestment Fund is really targeted towards small providers who sort of need help getting up and going. Like, if you have a development, somebody on full-time working on development, you can get grants and things like that. But if you are just a couple of people, maybe you're volunteer only, maybe who's to say you have the capacity, right, to seek grant funding, to fill out grant applications, to navigate those systems. So it's really designed to sort of build up the community provider so that they can hopefully be more sustainable.
So I'm so glad you said that, Lindsay. One of the things that we're hoping to demonstrate, so, with the event of COVID and then the COVID relief dollars and the ARPA funding that has come through across the nation and into our county, the county judge established the Domestic Violence Assistance Fund to provide flexible funding to domestic violence programs. And that includes, and HCDVCC served as the intermediary, and we refunded those to 14 different organizations. And we're about to get a second round of that assistance fund through the ARPA fund, but we're hoping that this demonstrates a model of a way for the county to invest in perpetuity, so forever, in its citizens that are experiencing and fleeing from domestic violence, that doesn't throw them into a homeless system, that doesn't throw them into other systems, but provides a financial assistance in a way that is preventative and protective at the same time. So those calls you'll be getting from HCDVCC to, you and Veronica are going to be around, how do we help facilitate this as the model moving forward?
Amazing.
Yeah, because, we all know ARPA funds are going to go away.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so exciting. That you guys are already doing it. So that's easy peasy. Let's just get it. Let's figure out how to keep it funded, right?
That's where we're going to need you. We definitely are going to need you. Veronica already knows. Veronica's right there with us.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And hopefully with the youth services fund, if they're funding smaller organizations, there could be also some help and with their sustainability, because if just when you get this grant and you don't have the financial infrastructure or the personnel to maintain it, but just to make sure that there's also some help with mentoring and sustainability and how to financial guidance and things like that as well too.
Yeah. Third question. So we also, like Lindsay stated, have worked on a survivor of crime resource guide, and this was to provide resources for all survivors. This was not directly a Commissioner's Court mandate. We did talk to a survivor that, again, it wasn't a Commissioner's Court mandate, but we reached out to a survivor who lost his mother to violence. And in our discussion with him, he stated that he really didn't know what services were available, and he learned a little bit about crime victims compensation, but really he's like, anything else I have had no clue. So we're like, maybe we should make a resource for those survivors that don't know, or especially those that are not reporting. We know a lot of survivors don't report to official channels. A lot do find out about services through their reporting to law enforcement. So what about those who aren't reporting? They should know what services are available and what's available out there that maybe doesn't involve the criminal justice system, but still gets the help they need. So things like mental health, counseling, or maybe learning how to make a safety plan, or a variety of different things from different service providers. So we decided to make this survivor of crime resource guide to list all the services available to survivors of variety different crimes. So it takes the gamut of a variety of different crimes. So it's not just domestic violence survivors. It's not just individuals who lost a family member to violence, but it's a variety of different ones and a variety of different services that they can go through and decide which works best for them. So it does have criminal justice agencies on there if they choose to contact them and report to those, but it also has other service providers that maybe don't include the criminal justice actors. So we recently completed that. It is posted on our website. I did send it off to Alicia, Barbie, and Amy earlier today, and it's available to anybody who would like to have that, or anybody you think we should send it to else. Any questions about that? No. So we also, like Lindsay said, created a model U visa certification policy. This was a commissioner's court mandate. We were mandated in November of 2020 to look at law enforcement agencies' policies when processing Form I-918B or the U visa certification or the law enforcement certification requests, and to promote this to law enforcement agencies. We created a report looking at what the policy is nationwide, in Texas, and in Harris County specifically. And we created this model policy that is much more survivor-centered than other policies that were being utilized in the county or in other Texas counties. We are still currently working with victim service providers and law enforcement agencies to promote this policy, to adopt all. Our hope is they adopt all of it, but if not all of it, at least parts of it, to make their policies more survivor-centered and better for immigrant survivors of crime to feel that they can report their victimization to law enforcement and get the certification form to apply for a U visa. Any questions about the U visa policy? And it does apply to victims of domestic violence as well. That is one of the categories that they can apply for a U visa for. So it's very much in line with domestic violence survivors. We also helped create the Harris County Sexual Assault Response Team. This again was a Commissioner's Court mandate that we helped develop the Harris County Sexual Assault Team in compliance with Senate Bill 476. We were directed in October of 2021 to work with stakeholders to determine who we should appoint to the inaugural SART team and put together this team. We worked with relevant stakeholders, and this goes back to when we asked, who do we talk to? We were talking to anyone and everybody about who should be on this and all the factors that go in part of creating a SART team. But we talked with various stakeholders and put together a memo discussing the requirements for Senate Bill 476 and proposed candidates for this inaugural SART team. This was presented at the November 9th, 2021 Commissioners Court, and the candidates were approved by court. And the SART had its first meeting on November 19th. SART elected Hawk as the presiding officer at this meeting, and they now facilitate meetings of the SART team. It has been meeting pretty much monthly since then, but the requirement is only that it meets quarterly in compliance with Senate Bill 476. But they're planning to meet monthly right now to get all the bylaws and all the specifics of how the SART's going to operate first in line, and then they're going to start going to quarterly. Any questions about the SART? No? No. So our future work. We are in the process of creating a family violence report that will discuss the issue of family violence, how it impacts survivors and their children, and provide strategies to better support survivors and focus on what they need to heal from the trauma experience that may not necessarily mean involving the criminal justice system. We're particularly looking at strategies that do not involve possibly incarceration in every single instance. This may be good in certain instances of family violence, but it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all for all instances of family violence. So we want to look at other strategies that could help, i.e. flexible funding, like Barbie said, or housing first, or other strategies that will help. Oh, and our DVHRT teams. and those kinds of things. So survivors of family violence do not need this one size fits all, but need a variety of different strategies to better support them in their individualized cases. And this report discusses all of those and what should be done to better support survivors and maybe make a plea for funding in certain areas. Flexible funding again, because that's a great one. But it's almost completed. We're doing some final edits. So we're hoping to present this to court soon, and then distribute to all our stakeholders as well and put it on our website. Any questions about that report? No. I like this, no questions. We've also identified trauma recovery centers. Lindsay talked a little bit about them, but they have been identified as a potential model to assist survivors. This is a variety of different survivors and help them heal from trauma. They work particularly well with those who have traditionally been underserved by the criminal justice system or choose, again, not to report their victimization to the criminal justice system, but get them the healing and the support they need to heal from their trauma. Survivors brought into a trauma recovery center are less likely to be victimized as well and less likely to commit victimization of others. So it also is a crime prevention technique. These centers help address and heal the trauma experienced by violent crime survivors, and they use assertive outreach. So rather than other traditional victim service providers that wait for someone to report to them, they actually go out into the community and look for individuals who might need help from the trauma recovery center. As of July 2021, there are currently 39 trauma recovery centers in 8 states. So we would really, again, the key piece is funding, but we would really love at least one. We probably need more because, like we said, Harris County is huge. At least one trauma recovery center, but hopefully many more trauma recovery centers in the Harris County area to help survivors heal from their trauma. We also,
Lindsay, I have a question. How might this intersect with the work that Dr. Robinson is doing with the violence prevention project, the pilot project that's being conducted with public health?
There's like, certainly they have similar sort of goals in mind, but otherwise there's not a whole lot of overlap, I don't think. Trauma recovery centers were developed by, the model was developed by Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, which I was a member of the Austin chapter before moving to Houston, and I am a member of the Houston chapter, but I haven't gotten super involved in Houston yet, although they're sort of a new chapter and haven't really gotten to be super robust yet. But I'm like such a fan of the trauma recovery center model, and I am so eager for Texas to get a trauma recovery center, and I would love for Houston to be the first trauma recovery center in Texas. Austin City Council did vote to approve the development of a trauma recovery center in Travis County. However, they just voted to say they're going to do it. They haven't done it yet. So we can still win this race. And at the end of the day, if we have 2 trauma recovery centers in Texas at the same time, I'll be super excited about that. But the idea around trauma recovery centers is really to have like an in-community physical place where you can get wraparound services for all survivors of crime, regardless of whether they are willing or able to participate in prosecution, whether or not there's any sort of formal proceedings going on. It doesn't matter the age of the trauma, like it doesn't matter. It's like real holistic trauma support, right? Without any sort of restrictions or barriers, including if you are financially able to, to pay anything. And everything that I've heard about trauma recovery centers and the way that they perform their wraparound services, it really is super, super holistic. And, they really build a relationship with the folks who come in and seek services, and they try to just address their whole needs through a public health social services model. So certainly the public health model of trauma recovery centers very much mirrors the work that public health is doing with violence prevention.
Well, I think it would be just from a cost effectiveness perspective, it would be really important to have a conversation with Dr. Robinson and some of the work that they're piloting, so that these are supportive of one another and not siloed from one another. Because I think I've been in Harris County for a really long time. we run the risk of that every time we start something new, is having it operate in a silo and not be connected to other things. So
Yeah, totally. I think that that's exactly right. And I think if we were to get approval from Commissioner's Court to move forward with a trauma recovery center, I think the first step would be developing a stakeholder group. And I imagine that she would be top of the list.
And the idea behind trauma recovery centers also is so that it's not siloed. I thought I was muted for a second, sorry. So it's not siloed, and that it is that holistic approach of using, public health and a hospital and social services and, a variety of different services, and a lot of times under the same roof, so that I don't need to go to 10 different places to get the help I need. I can go to one place and get everything I need in that one place. So again, it really helps those of communities that are underserved that maybe don't have the transportation or the means to get to 10 different places, especially thinking of Harris County. If I live in Pasadena and I have to go downtown, and now I have to go, to near Katy, or I need to go somewhere else, like that's a lot, even for people with means of transportation and the means of time and availability to get there. Now think of someone who doesn't have that transportation, who relies on public transportation. It's almost impossible to go to all those places. So really having one in the community where they really kind of have a one-stop shop of, I can get everything done for the most part in this one place. And
Well,
it's not tied to reporting.
and that's why I'm offering this conversation being extended to Dr. Robinson, because the violence prevention model that she's looking at is not about a place. It's more about a concept of the work, which is very similar to some of the work that we have with mobile advocacy. It's that it doesn't live, that the service doesn't live at a place. The service model lives within the service, the person that's doing the service. For example, I don't know if Jessica Rushing is on this call, but she's one of our mobile advocates. Part of being a mobile advocate is going to wherever that person is across the county, and I'm taking my whole one-stop shop with me as I drive to meet this person, or as I put this person in my car to take them to a shelter, or whatever it is that I'm doing, right? Like it's a very different, it takes it out of being a place and takes the work and places it with the interventionist, which for a county that's as large as Harris County is a really good model of service provision. So, and I think that's what's on the verge of happening with what's about to be piloted, or starting to be piloted with the Violence Prevention Project and some of the maternal health projects that are coming out of, Dr. Robinson and her group. Like they're on the verge of really doing some fantastic things. And I'd love to see the county build on that. It's almost becomes this, so it's a trauma recovery approach rather than a center. So just food for thought. That's my 2 cents.
No, that's really interesting. I would love to talk more about that and understand more about, how we can get the best of all of these things, right?
Absolutely.
We certainly just want folks to have access to services and everything to be as
Absolutely.
easily accessible as possible, and just remove obstacles. So however we can get there, that's what we want to do.
Any other
Fantastic.
questions about trauma recovery? No? All right. So we're also planning to start working on a report to discuss how to better support all survivors in Harris County. So we did work on the family violence, which is very specific to family violence survivors, but we also want to look at a report to better support all survivors in Harris County, particularly those who have traditionally been underserved, those who have experienced those barriers to service. So justice-involved survivors, for example, those who have been in trafficking, survivors experiencing homelessness, survivors with disabilities, those in the LGBTQ community, people, Black, Indigenous, people of color survivors, and victim service providers experiencing secondary trauma. Oftentimes, victim service providers and their trauma is not discussed as being a survivor. So they also experience trauma, secondary trauma. So we really want to get them the help they need as well with dealing with the secondary trauma, but also those that have been traditionally underserved, how we can better support all of them. And that also will be tied into the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council Survivor of Crime Committee, because we want to really talk to survivors to get their voices as part of this report. So really want to talk to survivors to hear what they have to say. Any questions about that? So we thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you about what we do, what we have done, what we're planning to do, what we should be doing. So this is our contact information. Like Lindsay said, we welcome you to contact us, tell us what we don't know, what we should maybe focus on. As we said, a lot of our stuff comes from Commissioner Court mandates, but hopefully we can start looking at other things in the future, or put a little bug in, Commissioner's Court's ear to look at certain issues that we need to look at, like permanent flex funding sources, maybe. So this is our contact information. So feel free to contact either myself or Lindsay if you have anything, and then you can go to our website and look more at our stuff. So thank you.
Well, I'll be really formal. Dr. James, Veronica, Lindsay, thank you both so very much. This presentation is phenomenal and so informative and critically important for all of us to have that information as we're serving others. So hopefully, I think, if you're here tonight and you found this valuable, share this with one other person, and then ask that person to make sure they share it with one other person. So we're throwing the pebble in the water and watching the ripples and making some impact, all the way from the very beginning of understanding why our commissioners are here, what they're charged with doing, and that they only know to do what we're telling them to do. So we have responsibilities as citizens, as participants in our local government, in raising our voices and saying what we need and why we need it. So hopefully more of you will join efforts with us and reaching out to Veronica and Lindsay, reaching out to our commissioners, watching Commissioners Court hearings. I'm telling y'all, sometimes I just play it in the background and wait for the fireworks. There's always fireworks.
It's
Always. So, that's a great way to get started. Just listen to it as you work. Replace your music for a moment. Anyway, thank you very much for this presentation. There's thank yous coming across the chat. What you do is amazing.
And just a reminder too, as Barbie said, to share this. And if you share this, this recording will be on our website starting over the weekend. So if anyone, when you share what you heard and say, hey, you want to listen to it, just go to our website and it'll be there along with our other deliberate dialogues as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Amy. One last thing before we log off. And again, I can't thank you enough, Veronica and Lindsay, for giving up your Thursday evening with us. This is the culmination of our invited speakers for this series. Our October offering will just be a reflective look at what we've learned, what questions have been raised internally for us regarding what we've learned, and then how do we use what we've learned to move forward. So I hope that you all will join us. If we will again be recording and engaging in really active dialogue with audience. So I hope that you all, and Veronica, Lindsay, I hope you can come back for that, because whatever we do there, we're bringing to you anyway. So come on and join us on the last Thursday of October for the wrap up.
And just really quickly too, next Tuesday night on the 4th of October, we are hosting a candidate forum for the 280th District Court, which is a protective order court. Information is on our website. It'll be at Bethel's Place Church on Sandpiper out in Southwest Houston at 7 o'clock. And so please come out and join us and learn about the candidates running for the protective order court bench. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank y'all so much for the work that y'all do. And thank you so much for having us. And we hope to keep talking to y'all, all the time.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Great. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Y'all can't get rid of us.
Don't want to. We love you.